the second of the series, but if I may take a minute just to give a little tiny background. I also, last time I gave a background and then somebody from the audience said you haven't introduced yourself. I introduced the speaker. So I think today I'll introduce myself first. I'm Ashish Ganju. I'm an architect, and at the moment I'm also president of this organization called Greha. Not GRIHA, not the certification body, but GREHA. We are a body which was started about nearly 40 years ago, registered about 30 years ago, and we have been concerned with the growth of knowledge in the field of architecture, environmental design, habitat design, things like that. And we thought that the architecture profession, which is a noble profession, I'm told, has something to do, must confront, must address society, the people who we are addressing. I mean, we are supposed to be serving in a more serious manner. So as a result, Greha had organized something called the Architecture Collegium, where architects by and large used to meet and discuss about problems which they felt were professional problems and things like that. This has been going on for about 5-6 years. Then we thought that now, it's too much. We must actually open out and talk to the rest of society as well. So this series has been started. The first month in the series, it's a monthly talk, and it will all change. It's not a talk which is delivered by architects only. In fact, I think I'll find it very difficult to find architects who are willing to come and talk to ordinary people. But let us see, this is a bit of a challenge to the profession. Last time when we started, the first one was by an urban planner who had done some study on new tools for urban planning, and who was particularly concerned about using communication as an important element in urban planning. So she started the first one in the series, and today the second one I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Savyasaachi, who is a known friend who's worked with architects, an anthropologist, at the moment heading the Department of Sociology at Jamia, Milia, and he's done some work in conservation projects, but of late we have been dialoguing quite a lot about various things, and I requested Professor Savyasaachi to deliver the second of the talks. He thinks I'll go and sit there, then I'll come back after you finish speaking. Yeah, I'll come back here. So the idea I've requested, this is the format, that we keep the talk fairly short, not more than half an hour, so that we have plenty of time for questions and answers, because the thing is that we really do want to talk to each other, and and this table is only an excuse for getting this thing started. So I'll hand over to Sachi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ganju. It's really a privilege to be here and share my work in progress. As we were told that I am not an architect. I know very little about architecture. My exposure to architecture has been through the good wishes of people who know me and who have tried to engage me to see if I can give them an anthropological perspective to how communities can become important in determining what architecture does. My first introduction to architecture was through working with Milia, who is a conservation architect. My first conversation really was that, look, do you want to take a risk getting me on the job when I know nothing about architecture? And if you're willing to fail, then I'm quite happy to tell you what anthropologists can describe as community, and how architects may want to take that is completely in their hands. So this is work in progress. So there are a lot of ifs and buts and several half-baked ideas and formulations, but nevertheless, since this is a discussion forum, I'm quite sure that I can make all the mistakes that need to be made in order to make sense of how things go. Anthropology, basically, anthropology is concerned with few questions which could become very important to other professions, including architecture. And I'm going to state three of these problematics that anthropology is concerned with, and then move on from there. The first of these is that in the face of continuous change, I mean, dialectics tells us there is nothing that is stationary and there is nothing that is unchanging. How do societies look for certitude? Something to ground themselves, something to make sure that, despite changes that happen, there is certainty of life, there is certainty of relationships. Because if everything keeps changing, it's very difficult to make sense of the world. If people say one thing today and another thing tomorrow, it is very difficult to anchor yourself and fix yourself in some relationships. And this is not only with people, but I think this is a larger problematic that all cultures address at some point in time and put that into part of their way of life. The second question is of social inclusion and social justice. This is really very topical these days, but this has been a concern right through. When we talk about social inequalities, when we talk about property, when we talk about ideas, there is always inbuilt into social structures processes of discrimination. And one of the concerns that we are really bothered about is what is the process of social inclusion? What is the process of exclusion? And how do anthropologists and sociologists look at the question of social justice from this point of view? And the third is the question of labor. And the question here is not really how labor is paid, what fair wages are, which is certainly a very important question. But the more deeper question is, do forms of labor also translate themselves into different forms of creativity, different structures, different imaginations? And how do we study this across different disciplines? Along with this, in recent times, there has been a very, very pointed discussion on the division between the mainstream and its critique. So we have actually a confrontation of two very, very strong paradigms. It's also called the paradigm war. And there is a very good book which has the same title as Paradigm Wars. So what is the two paradigms and what is the big fight? According to the mainstream paradigm, it is said that there is only one way in which things can be done. There is bound to be marginalization of people and ideas and things. And the only way you can solve the problem of social justice is to bring people towards the mainstream. Mainstream is not necessarily monolithic. There are diversities and there are varieties within the mainstream, but nevertheless, the mainstream operates within a framework, and you have to become part of the mainstream. And that is a democratic process, and that's the mainstream paradigm. And that's the dominant paradigm. That's also a paradigm that has its roots in what we also call the classical. The critique of the paradigm says that, look, there is no space in the mainstream for those who have been pushed out of it. There is ample evidence to say that you can't, how long do you need to wait until you get your turn in the queue to become beneficiaries of what the mainstream has to offer. So the critique is that those who are not part of the mainstream are actually part of no part. What are the spaces where these people, ideas and things which are part of no part, what spaces are there for them? What kind of spaces can be created for these kind of categories of people? And this has to be outside the mainstream. Now, a variety of words have been put forward to discuss that. There's a whole discussion on alternatives, There's a whole discussion on people's perspective, view from the bottom, and a whole lot of similar terms. And one of the words that is used here is vernacular. Now, vernacular in social sciences is not so frequently used as we see it used in other disciplines. Vernacular is used in the press, so you have a vernacular press. I see a lot of architects talking about vernacular architecture. But in social sciences, the vernacular is not so prevalent, but in my view, I think we need to look at the word a little more carefully and give it a little more precise meaning. The meaning of the word vernacular as it has been put down in a journal of folklore or folklore research, which is published from America in an issue called Grand Theory, and the article is called The Philology of Vernacular. I'll just read out what the vernacular is. I think this is a fairly accurate description of what the vernacular is, which holds, I think, which will hold true across disciplines. It says vernacular is a communicative modality characterized by 1, communicative resources, practices that are acquired informally in communities rather than by formal instruction. Communication relations that are immediate, grounded in the interaction, order, and life world, and horizons of distribution and circulation that are spatially bounded by locality and by region. Vernacular here is understood as a subfield of the dominant and the classical. It does not have an independent existence of its own. This is the common usage of the word vernacular, and I want to suggest that this is a very, very colonial imposition of a meaning on a word which actually is much more robust, is much more meaningful, and can actually give us something quite unique and fascinating. To get into what the vernacular could mean, I just need to make one more point. That the mainstream also is characterized by what I think is called the monopoly of the word. For example, when the Brahmins monopolized the word, the text, the church monopolized the word of the Bible, and today the state monopolizes the word which defines categories, and you cannot deviate from this monopoly. What modernity and what Sanskritization, if all of you know what Sanskritization is, a term coined by M.N. Srinivas to describe how the lower castes actually become mobile and become stake claims to being upper castes through emulating customs and practices of the upper caste. Actually, Sanskritization broke the monopoly of the word. Modern education became modern because it broke the monopoly of the word. The word was now accessible to every individual, in principle. And this is the beginning of modernity. We can discuss this after I have spoken, but this is an important point. The vernacular actually is a critique of this monopoly of the word. The vernacular is a word which has a completely different meaning, and it has the potentiality of being an equally strong word as the word of the mainstream. Now, what is the word of the mainstream? I have to tell you a story from Christianity, which I think will make the point fairly clear. When Christ was being taken for crucifixion, there are 14 stations of Christ that move from his being condemned to death to the last station when he is taken to the tomb from where he resurrects. All the 14 stations describe different things that happen on his way to the tomb. On the 6th station, something very unique happens. The 6th station has been given to Saint Veronica. And this is from where the word vernacular actually comes. There was a lady by the name of Bernice in Jerusalem, who was a pious lady. And when Christ reached a point, she gave Christ her vernacle which is a scarf, to wipe his sweat and blood. And in return, Christ's image was printed on that cloth. The word vernacular, comes from the vernacle of Beatrice. The issue is, she did not become Saint Beatrice, she became Saint Veronica. And the reason is that the gospel word, which is the word of the mainstream, which is the word of God, which is the word of the Bible, did not have a word to describe this vernacle or describe this true image of Christ that was imprinted on the scarf that was given by Saint Beatrice. A word was invented to describe this true image, and that word was Veronica. Veronica is a combination of two different words, one from Latin and one from Greek. Vera in Latin means true, and icon in Greek means image. So Veronica is the true image of Christ, the true image of Christ that was imprinted on this vernacle. Now, in the history of medieval art, the Dictionary of Medieval Art says that such images which are not created by the human hand are called archaeopoetica. And I think this is one of the images which is listed in the Dictionary of Art as one such true image. Now, the question is very simple. On the one hand, you have the word of the gospel, which is the word of God. And if you look at the history of philosophy, and if you look at the history of language, you come across a whole huge amount of research that is done to understand this word of God, because in the beginning was the word, and God made the world in his image. So when Adam and Eve fell down from paradise, the perfect language was lost. Adam knew the perfect language. And what is the perfect language? The perfect language is one which names everything in the world. Mankind was in darkness because they knew nothing of the world. They had lost this perfect language. And Umberto Eco has a very interesting book on this. The book is called Perfect Language. For about 200 years, the classical word, which includes Sanskrit, which includes Chinese, which includes Latin, which includes Greek, was searched. The word. There was a whole lot of research which was done to find out what is it in the word that we can discover the word, which we can see the image of God. Because God made the world in his image, so in order to know the world, you need to know God, and the only way you can do that is to study the word. Now, this was the word of immortality. As opposed to this is the word vernacle, the vernacular word, Veronica, which is giving you the true image of Christ. One is the word of immortality, which has no face, and the other is the word of the vernacular, which has the true image of Christ. These are two opposite notions of the word. Both of them are divine because both of them are not created by the human hand. They are not creations of human beings. Now, I think this distinction is very important in order to understand what the vernacular means and what implications can it have for real life. Now, these two words are at the root of two different processes of social construction. This is my hypothesis. Social anthropology is concerned with the idea of social construction. Architecture is one such activity of social construction. Architecture is a social process, as there are many other social processes which involve materials. The architectural process begins, or at least has one end, in the imagination, in the image, in the concept. The whole architectural process is concerned with giving material form to this image, to this imagination, to this concept. in brick and concrete, in brick and mortar, or whatever materials you want to use. It begins from there and it continues until what you think is a representation or a construction of the image actually happens. Then it goes on until the building begins to disintegrate. Now this process can be conceptualized from the perspective of these two understandings of the word, the relationship between the word and the image. One is immortality, the word of immortality, and the other is the word of the true image of Christ. What is true about this image of Christ? And what is it that we are learning about the process from this interpretation of the true image of Christ? Now the question is, what is it that is being exchanged between Beatrice and Christ? My view of the matter is that all the 14 stations of the cross actually represent a labor, the work. This is a labor which generates sweat and blood. This is a labor of redemption. This is a labor of creating the world. When Beatrice, who's a pious lady, gives him the vernacular or the scarf to clean his face, and the image gets printed, it is the cloth that cleans the sweat and blood of labor which then gets imprinted on the image. So let's say the work that we do and the object that it creates are very, very crucial to the vernacular process, as opposed to the image of immortality, which has a different notion of work. And that notion of work is that you are condemned to drudgery for the rest of your life, and labor is going to be stifled through multiplicity of languages, through the babel of languages. There is a story in the New Testament about the Tower of Babel, which is that people are trying to make a tower that will reach heavens, and they can't do that precisely because the languages are so many that they can't come to any agreement on how to work and how to do things. So the multiplicity of languages in one case is Babel, and it does not take you to heavens where you want, and you are condemned for the rest of your life to labor in drudgery. There is multilingualism here. Vernacular is also a combination of two words. It's also bilingual, but it is bilingual it's not Babel. It is a bilingualism that holds the true image. Right? And I think this distinction has to be kept in mind. That labor in one case is condemned to drudgery and can never reach its objective, which is heavens. And heavens here is labor realizing its potential through itself. And in the other case, language, bilingualism and multilingualism is an asset. It does not lead to confusion, it actually enhances labor's possibility of realizing itself. And I think this is the vernacular perspective on labor, and this is the vernacular idea of labor. Now, how does this apply to architecture? Are there similar examples across the world, or is this just a Christian notion? I was very fortunate to have worked on Guru Ki Masjid, which is a mosque made by the 6th Sikh Guru in Gurdaspur. And I think this is one of the finest examples of multilingualism and the fruitfulness of labor, and not labor that is condemned to suffocate itself in the babel of languages. The story is very simple, that the 6th Guru, Hargobind, he fought the Mughals, and at the end of the war, he sat with his disciples to ask a very simple question. How can we put an end to this strife between different communities? Several suggestions were made. Somebody said, make a water tank, somebody said, make a sarai, and all this was shot down because the Guru felt that this is going to be destroyed. In that discourse, it emerged that they should make a mosque. Why a mosque? Because the Muslims would not destroy it. The Sikhs would not destroy it because the Sikh thought of it. And at that moment, Vishwakarma comes down in human form and says, would you give me the privilege of making this mosque? And the Guru said, certainly. The Hindus would not touch it because it was made by a Hindu god. Now here is an example of a different kind of multilingualism. Here is an entity whose mind is Sikh, the body is Muslim, and the soul is Hindu. And it is a perfectly divine entity in the middle of a vernacular structure in Har Gobindpur. The most beautiful part of this mosque is that when I went there, the Granth Sahib was kept inside the mosque. And it was a fantastic example of how multilingualism actually creates the true image of the divine, not the idea of immortality. This could not stand for too long because once the conservation work started, a very eminent Muslim MP shot a letter to the Human Rights Commission saying that, look, they have converted a mosque into a Gurdwara. The police came there, they made their inquiry. Nothing of that kind happened, but nevertheless, the Waqf board came into the picture, and the Nihang Singhs, who were actually looking after this mosque, entered into an MOU with the Waqf board. And again, we see examples of bilingualism happening here. They exchanged signatures. So, the Waqf board signed in Gurmukhi, and the Nihang Singhs signed in Persian. And this was a perfect example of how the vernacular could hold the true image, an image that is not created by the human hand. Having said this, I want to give you, I have 5-10 more minutes. I want to give you another example of a vernacular from this perspective, and it is not in this tradition. It is completely from the margins. And this is from the forest people of Ujman, of Shingaru. These are forest dwellers who are actually on the margins, who have no place anywhere in the mainstream. No matter how much anthropology has been done, no matter how literate we've become, we still are not mentally ready to accept forest dwellers as at par with ourselves. They live in a world which they describe as the Shringar Bhumi, which is the land of color and beauty. They make their house with materials that are available there, as is quite obvious. And they stay in the house so long as there is enough crop, there is no crop failure, and not too many people die. And in case that happens, the message is that the space is not conducive for them to continue to stay here. But the space here is intelligent, because before you decide on making a house or a settlement anywhere, you have to take permission from the space in order to see if you can build a house here or not. Now, the expression taking permission from space there is no other way I can explain it, because there are certain rituals performed, there are certain divinations done to know whether the space gives permission or not. So what they do is they leave some food or they spread some rice over the night, and they leave a word with the other residents of that space. I wouldn't use modern English language for that, because that will take you in different directions altogether. There are other non-human living beings who live in those spaces, who are intelligent, because of which the space becomes intelligent. And if the pattern is disturbed in one way, then you know you can stay here. If the pattern is disturbed in another way, then you know you can't stay here. So here is an idea of space which determines where the wall has to be made, and not the other way around. And I find a similar example in the works of Michelangelo, who I think Gombrich is the one who writes about this. He says Michelangelo would stare at stones for hours together until he actually discovered a form inside the stone. And all that he would do is to chip off the unnecessary stone there so that the form can present itself in its true image. I think this is the vernacular imagination. How do you then look at the whole history of architecture and buildings by which we get a sense of history? One very important thing to remember is that in that society, when you abandon a settlement, everything dissolves back into the forest. Do these people have a sense of history or not? Will be the question, because our sense of history is very, very strongly embedded in the architectural forms that we call monuments. What would happen to a sense of history if nature was to be strong enough to dissolve whatever remains there are of architectural forms about which a lot of us work and conservation work happens? What is the character of these architectural forms? From the vernacular point of view, we want to ask this question, keeping labor in the central position. So when I was looking after buildings, which are sort of not protected buildings, unprotected buildings, which are basically within community settings, and the state is not responsible for it, therefore the anthropologist is needed there in order to give them community support. When you look at these big buildings and you ask the question, are we conserving the building or are we conserving also the processes that led to the making of the building? The question is that we have no notion in the conservation process of the processes that go into the making of the building, because more than 90% of these buildings that are big buildings, which are part of a nationalist imagination, are actually made by slave or serf labor. What is then the conservation question? What is then the architectural process? This comes to my last point, which I pointed out earlier. Is there a correlation between labor and architectural form? Does the change of labor actually change the architectural form? Or is labor just labor power, which is just physical work? Does labor has no imagination? In other words, my question to myself was that if slave labor makes these big buildings, which are beautiful, which have intricate details, what kind of buildings would be made if there was labor equality? Right? Wage labor is still not labor equality. Wage labor has rights, but it is still not what we expect labor to be. So the way to formulate this is really to say that the architectural process involves two distinct kinds of labor. One is the mental labor and the other is the manual labor. In the monuments that we preserve, in the monuments that are nationalist monuments, there is a total separation between the mental and manual labor. Amongst the forest dwellers, there is a total unity of the mental and manual labor, because the one who makes the building also thinks of the building, is also looking after the building. But in the buildings that are made here, the one who makes the building does not touch any materials, and the ones who look after the building knows nothing of how the building was made or what the material was used. The question about labor equality is that if the division between mental and manual labor was to be annulled, in other words, if the mason and the architect was to sit together and decide the form of a building, would the shapes, the sizes, the ratios and proportions change? Is this possible? I was fortunate or unfortunate to go to one of the places in Orcha where alternative building materials are experimented with by development alternatives. And I happened to reach on a day when there was a little conflict between the mason and an architect. And this was concerning how the ark was to be made. So the mason told this architect, look, this is not the right way of making an ark. It will fall. So the architect turns around and said, look, who has paid money? Have you paid the money or have I paid the money? Who is skilled and who is not is the question. So you shut up and I will make the ark the way I want to make. They made the ark they wanted to make, and the next day the ark fell down on the head of the architect.
Is this true?
This is true. And I was fortunate or unfortunate to be there when this happened. Now this is an anecdote which has many different layers of meanings behind it. In other words, the possibility of manual and mental labor coming together is actually linked to the social conditions in which construction work is possible. Right? Architecture is a certain kind of social formation, which is to say that the making of a building is a very complex task. I've seen it from the outside and I can only say it is very complex because it involves multiple disciplines, it involves a huge workforce, it involves creative skills of coordination, it involves precision, it involves ratio and proportion, it involves huge expenses, and it involves risks. Right? All these conditions can only be met provided at any particular point of time in history, conditions are ripe for all the elements to be made available to you. Which means the idea should have the materials that you want, the idea should have the people who will live in it. Until this happens, an architectural space cannot be created. And I therefore think that from the standpoint of social formations, there are three key components of architecture. One is the sense of the line, two, sense of ratio, and the third is the sense of positionality. The sense of the line is really very important, and this is yet another hypothesis that I want to leave before you. This is something that I'm working on, and I would really appreciate if there could be critiques and responses to this. So my question was that what is a line? And this really, this idea came to me having read a book written by an anthropologist, Tim Ingold, called The History of the Line. It's an amazing book. I think all of you should read it. It's an amazing book which runs into 500 pages. And the gist of the book really is that it poses the question, what is a line? And the line is not to be seen anywhere. And the book is suggesting there is only a sense of the line that we have. Right? And where you draw the line is actually the beginning and the end of the social construction process. And these lines are not really lines of buildings, these are lines of social boundaries. Right? All social spaces are actually making lines in social boundaries. So how do you draw the line is therefore crucial to the kind of imagination that you will unfold of the entire building. So my hypothesis was, or my question was, does the making of a line also unfold an imagination? And how many different ways of making a line can there be? And I was helped to answer this question by some students who were actually debating this very, very simple question. And I think this is a technical question that debates across fields. And the question is whether it is important to do AutoCAD drawing or digitalization, or is it good to work on the board? I think it's a very simple question. And the answers were very, very pragmatic. There are negative points here, negative points there are positive points here and positive points there. But the crucial question that I thought should be asked, having read Tim Ingold's book, is to say that are these lines being drawn with the separation of mental and manual labor, or are these lines being drawn with the unity of mental and manual labor? And I found that there were 3 different ways of making lines, and each of these actually corresponds to a change in imagination of architectural form. So the history says, and this is a little paragraph in this book, which says the first lines were made on the horizon. Then came Renaissance, and the board, came perspective, and you had drawing boards. The building structures changed. And then you had the digitalization, where you don't see the spaces, you don't see the sky, you work on the computer, you digitize, and the building spaces change further. What would the building be when the line is made with the unity of mental and manual labor? And my last point here is that given the scale, the depth, the width, and the amount of people construction work engages, right? The labor is the most neglected discussion in architectural discourses. The question of social justice is not only to give rights to construction workers. The question is, what kind of social inclusions can there be? What can architecture contribute to the question of social justice? Can there be just architecture from these point of views? And I think the vernacular perspective gives us the possibility of exploring how do we move from where we are to something that we can call just architecture. Just architecture is not only using local material. Just architecture is not only doing local labor. It is not being context specific. It is searching in the context for a universal. You see, normally when we talk of contexts, we think it's myopic, it is short-sighted, it is local. But every great thing is born in a locality. Christ was born in a place. Mahatma Gandhi was born in a particular place. Right? Certain plants only happen in places, in context-specific situations. But what is it in those spaces? What is it in those objects that make the universal in the local? And I think this is what we need to think about. That the context is certainly context-specific, but not every context is context-specific. There are contexts which have the universal in it. Otherwise, there is no universal space for universal things. Universals can only be found in localities, in situations. So I'm leaving this question with you. What is the possibility of just architecture as an answer, as a response to the question of social justice, which is not just to give workers their rights, to give poor people houses, but more than that, can there be a just form of architecture? With this, I think I leave it for people to discuss. Thank you very much.
Point of focus. But I would really like questions from the audience. And I think, Sachi has raised some very clear questions.
First, when you talk about labor, you seem to treat it as a monolithic entity. You don't, labor could be both skilled, semi-skilled, and manual. And the thing is, there are issues like expression, implied thought, and the use of hand. So somehow you seem to treat everything as a monolithic entity, and you don't actually somehow point out about these facts. Like when a labor works, he also uses his hand. There is an interesting intrinsic thought behind his actions. So somehow that leaves me confused. And the second thing was after listening to your lecture, is there one single hypothesis to your whole lecture? Because there were multiple hypotheses that you presented. So is there one principal core argument that you would like to emphasize?
I can respond to that right away. I am totally aware that labor is not monolithic. When I make this divide between mental and manual labor, I think these two categories are inclusive of all the diverse forms. So when we talk of unskilled labor, we are actually talking of mindless manual labor. And when I talk of labor as a drudgery, I actually mean that a lot of people who work on construction sites actually do nothing that is using their mind at all. Lifting bricks, I mean, you know it. So there is a diversity, but I think the basic thing we are concerned with is seeing the divide between the mental and manual. Once this is overcome, then I think a lot of other problems can be addressed also. One single hypothesis, question of just architecture. Every other hypothesis that I put forward to you actually links up with the question of just architecture.
More questions, but can I suggest people who are standing up there, there are a lot of seats in front. Please come and
So
sit comfortably.
and frankly speaking, as a woman, I was screamed at by a client that if you're pregnant, why did you take this project on? So I feel I'm at the same level as a brick lifting woman. And I don't think the women lifting the bricks are doing work brainlessly either. They have their own little gamut in which they do their thinking process. And by increasing that, we're not going to be able to help out. What we have to do is we have to have very, very strong standards of safety as well as caring. I mean, a human being, how many hours are they supposed to work? And who actually is in charge of making that happen? Because the other problem is that whatever was happening when we talk about vernacular architecture is not going to happen anymore, because the person who's training from their father or who's imbibing the traditional knowledge system is already exposed to so many other knowledge systems that he will make his choices. So your vernacular is going to change dramatically. People are not going to work in the same format. So the just architecture which was happening when, I could say, in Barmer, a woman was making her own house and then she was decorating it in her own way and doing it at her leisure time in between cooking food and making juttis and shawls. That's not going to happen in our day and age. So we have to have systems which are very organized and have to be linked up with other systems of society.
Conservation architects was that is there any building in history that has not been made by slave and serf labor? And I found at least one, maybe two. One was the Golden Temple. It was made by the labor of love, and that's, I think, what entitles it to be World Heritage, just for this simple reason. And it's a beautiful form. And the second one was the Guru Ki Masjid. It was all made by love's labor. Whether that is possible in the future or not, maybe not. Given the conditions in which we work, given the way the industrial system works, given the way the capitalist system works, maybe not. But my question to you is, just because it seems impossible in the near future, is it good enough for us then to drop the question also? Because justice is very important, and what you say is right, that we need to have strong standards, we need to have safety. But my question is that is this enough for the architectural imagination to work forward and take giant leaps? Or are we not restricting the possibilities that architecture holds by limiting ourselves by the conditions imposed by the world in which we live? I mean, my history tells me that when there was slavery, there was no possibility of seeing any ray of light, because slaves were there everywhere. We did come out of slavery. I mean, can you imagine yourself in a condition when there was slavery, and would you see any ray of hope for you to get out of it? Bleak. But still we did come out of it. And I think that is what we must not forget. That conditions are imposing. But I think the human imagination is far more potent than we can imagine. So only on that principle I would say that yes, what you say is right, but I would also request that maybe we should not limit ourselves to the conditions imposed on us of impossibility of things.
Just one more point. Every project must have a capacity building component. That is the only way you can see in future the person working on a site will be able to do more in terms of thinking or contributing. That part can only come if by law a certain kind of training on every project. Like if a mason's working on a site, he must be given a mandatory training program for so many hours if he has worked for so many hours. I mean, I'm just giving you examples. And we've tried it on one site. We worked on Miranda House and we trained, we said every mason who would work in live would be given a training program at the end of a month, so that the rest of the months he worked on the project, he would have more capacity to work on heritage structures. And this works for anybody. It works for a welder, it works for a mason, it works for anybody. The problem in India, I'm not talking worldwide, the problem in India is that the contractor gets the cheapest labor who's probably never worked on a building, because the maximum profit is taken by a contractor. And this is the reality. So if we are looking at justice and if we are looking at contribution at every level of every human being participating on a project, to give them that space, we have to have platforms.
Thank you.
Can I add to what you just said? And also, I would like to mention that I don't agree that there wasn't, it's very difficult to find just architecture earlier, and that it's not possible to find it today. I know from personal example, and I will not generalize. I would like to give a personal example. We're on a project on which I worked for 25 years, and I'm still working, where everybody involved, I'm learning. You see, you say the mason should learn, but I go every time to the site to learn. It is possible that every person involved, there's no classes, there's no capacity building program, because we are all learning. And this has happened for 25 years. We have built over 100,000 square foot of space in the mountains on a steep mountainside with no machinery. A little bit, we can get machinery when we need a little bit, but it is possible. And I would just like to put that in. This is not the time and place to go into detail, but it is happening around us. I can also tell you that a lot of people who are living in deprived conditions, which we would feel are deprived conditions, are actually working with labor and imagination tied together because they've got nothing. And they are very creative, and this is the real vernacular. It's happening around us in a large manner. The problem is that none of our schools, and it's the formal system, which you started your talk with, which is denying access to everyone to this kind of information. So I hope that we might find platforms. We can think of platforms. This is one platform that we've invented here, where we can do that. It's not a school, it's not a college, I've done all that, as you know. It doesn't work very far, it doesn't go very far. I mean, your big universities work, up to a point, up to a point, but it's hard work. It's much nicer if you can do it with people in a sort of happy circumstance. It's possible.
Yeah. So.
Thank you, Sachi sir, for your presentation. Very interesting. I had two comments and one question. One, the comment was on your labor of love and Harvinder side, and I think you are hopeless romantic, because there's also the labor of destruction, which is the Babri Masjid, which stands as a structural binary to the construction of the Golden Temple. So that's one comment. The second is related to this idea of the vernacular. The word is really, I completely understood it from the genealogy that you presented, but within I think architecture, I don't know why architects or anybody wants to function with the idea of vernacular, and this idea comes to me from actually Romy Khosla's book, where he talks about critiquing the idea of heritage and conservation as something that is closed in on itself, while I think architecture or any creative form involves open-endedness in innovating with ideas, technologies, materials, and both intellectual and Masonic logic, if you want to call it that. So, in a sense, what I'm trying to ask you and this forum is that why in the heads of architects does the category exist? Because everything will involve some things which have existed traditionally and buildings are incrementally then created over different times with different materialities. Of course, the relationships of labor get complicated, and one can compare. I mean, I'm not going to go into the labor issue right now entirely, but I want to kind of open out this idea of, oh, there is something like that is traditional or vernacular, and there's something that is modern. Why is it not seen as a part of the same continuum of making?
Yes, there is labor of destruction. I would say Babri Masjid is a good example of not leaving the monopoly of the word, the grammatical word. Right? And therefore, there is no possibility of working and thinking bilingually. Why is there such a big divide? Well, I think if there was no divide in the classificatory systems that architects follow, then I think the vernacular as they perceive it would not exist, because vernacular is a subform of the mainstream. For example, the vernacular now is becoming ethnic, right? The hotels are getting vernacularized. So you have a hotel, which is a forest dwellers modern institution, which is now being taken to a 5-star hotel to give it a vernacular look. Now this opposition is the problem, and what I have tried to argue is that I think vernacular is not to be treated as a subset of the mainstream or the classical. It has an independent existence of its own. It is grounded differently. Its worldview is different. Its metaphysics is different. Its ontology is different. And I think this is what we need to recover. And just to add one more point to this, that this is not a quibbling over words only. I think there was a point in time, and there still is this little discomfort when we begin to debate definitions, that we are going verbal gymnastics, or we are trying to enter semantics where the real issue is something else. But I think we should not forget that the battle over words is the most important battle, because you change categories and you change people's imagination. You use the wrong word and you change the entire worldview. And you don't give the right word its right place in your worldview, you create misunderstandings. And this is very common in everyday life. The word love, you will be surprised to see how many different meanings there are to this word love when you use it in everyday life. And half the problems arise because nobody is listening to the meaning of the word that has been given to it by the one who uses it. You take the word and you interpret it in your grid, in your template. And that's half the problem. So clarity of thought is very important. And I think there has to be a way that we need to find out in order to debate words and recover the quality of the words and the power of the words that there is. Because it is true that in the beginning was the word. If there was not the world would not exist. And this is as true of Christianity, of the gospel word, as of the vernacular word. But the issue is, what is more earthy? What is more imaginative? What has the possibilities of opening the mind more? Is it the gospel word, or the word that is in the image of immortality? All big architectural forms aspire to immortality, actually. Form structures, huge structures, communicating divinity, communicating kingship, all immortality. The vernacular is not concerned with immortality. It is concerned with the true image. And the true image is one that, like the relic of Christ's face, fade out. The relic of Christ's image on that vernacular, on that vernacle, is now fading out. That does not make it any lesser of a true image just because it fades out. I think that is the point that we need to think about. It's not immortality, it's about the true image. Yes, ma'am. I think, can we have other people? Then we'll come back to you again. Please.
Well, you have used two categories, local and universal, labor and mental.
Labor and?
mental.
Mental and manual labor.
Mental and manual labor, vernacular and mainstream or immortal. So presumably these are two different categories with some basic difference between these two. First question is, do you have a preference for one category over the other? The second question is, if you think both are unique in themselves, then is there a way to incorporate both of these basic different categories without losing their unique differences?
Yours is it's a very political question. It's not a definitional question.
No, I'm asking an architectural question.
I mean, all architectural questions are political in a very devious way. The divide is actually an existential divide, right? Because the way you imagine, right? Your imagination unfolds through the word, and depending on how you root yourself in the word, your imagination and your processes will unfold. In the vernacular, actually there is no such distinction. Allows that existential tension for language to grow. In other words, what I am suggesting is that languages are creative only if they allow existential issues to be challenging them. If you are, I mean, this is what we learn in anthropology, that you have to struggle to find the right word for what you see, right? And in that you may create a new word, right? That is the creative challenge of all art. You create new languages of art, you create new languages of form in order to address the questions and the issues that you want to give expression to. And that is the growth of a language. And I think that is the vernacular process. And it would combine, it would not combine, it would take, it would be creative in its combinations.
Do I understand that you are advocating vernacular?
Yes, very clearly.
Yes.
Very clearly, yes.
Okay, so you are creating a divide.
I am saying that the divide is to be thrown out, because in that divide, the vernacular is a subset of the mainstream.
No, but divide exists, and you are.
I am critiquing that divide.
You're going for either or.
I will repeat that there is a paradigm war, and in that paradigm, I don't subscribe to the paradigm that says that the vernacular needs to mainstream.
May I interrupt here? Because I think this is Subhash is what he's raised, the question. Is, Subhash, through his talk, I'm now speaking on your behalf,
Please.
And I thought, before I sat here, that he found a kind of very poetic position. Because what he was doing, he was using the word like a tool. And indeed, the word is also our first tool. We shape the world with it. We create the world with it. So it's the first tool. And I thought you did that, but you see, he is, after all, and he raised a kind of dialectical model. You took a dialectical model, but I think at the same time you were trying to be also poetic, because you were finding cross connections, and you were all the time trying to be creative about your understanding of something which was even formally available. So although, you see, I think if we look at that part of his lecture, you use both mediums. In fact, that's not a mistake, maybe that's the good thing. You use both forms. You use the dialectical form, but you also use the poetic. And it's in the poetic you will find the weaving of these opposites and the compositional quality of using opposites in order to compose them into form. Good form, just form, we can describe it in different ways.
Opposites is vernacular and the immortal, or the mainstream, whatever word you use for that. If there is to be, these two have to be put together, but you are not for putting these two different or opposing viewpoints. You are not in favor of putting these two different worldviews together. You are only for one or the other. You see, you are only for the vernacular and not for the immortal or what you call mainstream or what you call universal. So there are two worlds, and you are advocating. I'm sorry if I am being political.
No. I will just clarify my point. I am saying there are two competing notions of the universal.
Yes, and you have chosen one of the two.
I'm saying that in the present situation, we have to assess which offers us more potentiality and possibilities.
That's a
That's
subjective viewpoint. Okay.
That we can discuss later on. Yes, please.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, the example that you gave of the arch, I think that was not so much of an example of manual labor and mental labor. It was an example of individual capacities. If there was another architect, maybe another mason, the outcome may have been completely different. That's possible. And when you say that mental labor and manual labor should come together, I think it's very difficult to come at the concept stage. There are many various reasons for it. An architect does a building, plans it, then he does a BOQ, then competitive bids are invited, then the contractor comes in, then he hires the mason. So you cannot come in at the concept stage. Also, there are so many various forms of labor. There's mason, there's carpenter, there's electrician, there's bar bender, there's so many. Not everybody can come together at concept stage. Their inputs are related to details and their sphere. And the dialogue always takes place. Whenever a drawing reaches anybody who's going to execute it, he's free to respond. And it always happens. It happens in a house also. When an architect issues a drawing, it goes to a contractor, it goes to a mason, anybody. They respond. And you listen to them. Because, of course, it's not that doesn't take place, but it cannot take place at the concept stage. In more complex projects, there's this concept of shop drawings. You issue a drawing, then somebody comes in, he prepares shop drawings, then you evaluate, and then it happens. So it's not that it doesn't happen, it takes place all the time. And also, when you say that the manual labor and mental labor should come together, I think they should come together before the architect becomes the architect. That divide, there's so much divide that is there between mental labor and manual labor should not be there at all. I think it has to do with architectural education, the way the architects are educated. Even construction, the way construction is taught in schools. It's taught in studios and you make drawings. That's it. But you hardly go and interact with people at site. It doesn't happen. Even when you go for your training, you are either making staircase drawings, toilet drawings, this and that. Even that training is, I don't know what kind of training takes place. So it is to do with education.
It requires a long response, but I'll be very, very brief. When I talk about the division between mental and manual labor, all that I'm saying is that people who are skilled and are capable of doing both are actually not allowed to do both. For instance, the caste system is a very good example of the division between mental and manual labor. Right? So the mental labor is to do with the word. Right? It does not mean that the dhobi is not thinking. It's only that the dhobi's mind is not given any space to reflect on the word of the Brahmin. We all know that the Harijans, whenever they heard the Vedas, the oil used to be poured into their ears. This is a politically constructed division, first. Second, in the modern age, unfortunately, the freedom that the wage labor gives has an opposite side, which is it also impoverishes. And it impoverishes the imagination and malnutritions the spirit to a point which we can't even recognize. There is an architectural procedure, and I think all of you should sort of give examples to the contrary or in support, whatever, because I'm not an architect. Whatever I've seen of the architectural process, I think there is a procedure that you follow. But when I say unity of mental and manual labor, I think what I mean is what you said towards the latter part of your question, which is process of consultation. I mean, how can you think of a process of how would you design a mall in a vernacular mode? You can't. Because in principle it is not allowed to design a mall through a process of consultation. It is just eliminated at the very conception stage.
There's a real life example. Are you finished?
The second example is for different kinds of architectural forms, maybe consultation process is allowed and this divide may not hold. So what I'm trying to draw your attention to is that mental and manual is a falsely politically constructed divide, which has actually led to processes which are supported by the industrial system, and it leads to impoverishment. Right? And it is this divide, which is a political divide, that one needs to critique. In order to see that every person has a mind and can bring a mind to things that are happening. I mean, everybody cannot, I mean, in a democracy, 20 million people can't talk at the same time. That's true. But democracy also allows a multiplicity of forums for expression. I think that democratic space, that democratic procedure could be harnessed. How it will be done, I think I would like to learn from architects how would they do it, because
There's a question there. So,
I have a question for Ashish. So, yes, please. What we've seen, space is scarce and it's getting more expensive by the day. Yet, a lot of the space is currently measured by square feet. If we add the dimension of time, what is happening is much of the spaces are designed around a primary use case and are used for less than 50 hours in a week. In a societal where, for 21 to 30-year-olds, spaces have become so expensive for us to be able to afford or even be a part of the city anymore. Are there any examples in your experience where spaces are now being designed around multiple use cases such that they can be utilized for more than 50 hours, even 100 hours, or even 120 hours, such that the cost of use of that space can be spread over more on a time-based basis? Is there certain examples that you've seen? Or is it even possible, or are we imagining too much?
No, I think that the very assumption you started your question with, I would challenge. You're saying that space is getting expensive and scarce. I think this is a complete fiction which has been created by the real estate barons. There were robber barons of all kinds, and these are barons who create this kind of scarcity. It's simply a scarcity creation, a hoarding principle, So there is no shortage of space as far as from my own experience. The other thing that you asked is that about how is it therefore that, what was the second part of your question?
The dimension of time.
Time, yeah. Well, I find that for instance, the real life example that you asked, to be very, very kind of down to earth, poor people in cities are doing just that. That they create habitation which is structured in terms of time. Just look what happens. You start with twigs and found material, and in due course the same family will find better and better materials and upgrade. The principle of upgrading, you see, for instance, it has been presumed that slums are created, and I've been told this by senior people in responsible positions, that slums are, all these badly built houses, they're all tela mela and things like that. Actually, that is the life of the building. It's the fact that no house is ever complete if it is a house. If it's a home, every building actually changes with time, even institutions. I mean, there are very good examples of how when the head of an institution changes, then the very institutional campus itself undergoes tremendous change. Very often the architect pulling his hair out and all that kind of thing, but it's all, time is the element of inhabitation. Without time, there is no inhabitation. And inhabitation is the actual basis of space. What space we're talking about is habitable space, isn't it? He talked about space, of course, as habitable space, but also he talked about space as an abstract phenomenon, as something which has to be understood as a structure in the mind. But you're talking about habitable space, and habitable space is only what is one of the most important morphological elements of habitable space is time, not just space. And space. So sorry, we can go on like this, but does that in any case answer your question? I don't know.
I was referring to more in a week, 50 hours to 110 hours in a week. How does the space morph from, let's say, a work use case to, let's say, a recreational use case or a sort of sleeping use case?
Well, even in real estate examples, this is now beginning to happen in a big way, because you don't have any more. Well-designed space is. The notion of function, of defined function in space, was a notion of a very a kind of crude part of the modern movement. You know, in the beginning of the 20th century, when the modern movement in architecture was hardly ever understood except by a very few people who wrote some manifestos, which were not read by anybody. But the idea that you had this thing of function, you know, that whole thing about function defining something or form, all that business, it's a very simple, sort of almost naive notion. But the moment architecture became aware of the environmental issues, which is sort of halfway down the century, after we started bombing each other with nuclear bombs and all that, you know, and we realized that something else was going on, that there was in fact a pact with nature, which all habitation entered into. Then we became a little more sophisticated. I put it to you that we are much more sophisticated now. This space was designed as a theatre, and today what we are conducting is also a kind of theatre, but you know, it's not quite what it was designed for. So this multifunctional usage is getting more and more a daily phenomenon, if you like, or an ordinary phenomenon, because we are now in a position to measure not just dimensions of space in terms of feet and inches or centimeters or whatever, but the thermal quality, its moisture content, its, you know, the physics of habitable space can be now measured and tabulated, etc., much better. It's just that our awareness is more. And I find, for instance, that I don't design anymore according to functions at all. I look for environmental conditions. Now, in those environmental conditions, you can do what is most suited. And sometimes the things change, that in the daytime you can do certain things. Anyway, that goes on. Architecture is always like that. There was a brief period, and I think it was very much a function of the kind of industrial system that the world went through in the 18th, 19th century and the early part of the 20th, that there was a kind of pauperization of understanding. And we lost a great deal of, a lot of the real estate problems that you started off with are a function of that mindset. But I think we're losing it, thank goodness.
Yes, good evening. As a French architect settled in Delhi since few months, I will just make a small comment, both as an outsider, but also somebody that has experienced a little bit what's going on. And I just would like to bring back the focus a little bit about this building. Because I think it's one of the most inclusive buildings I've seen so far. Indian Habitat Center is very interesting we could discuss about it, I think, on time, it's not the point, but I was wondering what makes this building so much inclusive. And I think it's not a question of design, it's a question of program. And you know, the idea of this building was kind of utopic way of bringing together people to have an holistic approach of an issue that is also about inclusiveness, which is habitat. And it made a very unusual project. And when I see what's going on now, you talk about mall, of course there is not vernacular mall, perhaps there is Gilead, by the way, which is very interesting, and it's kind of a vernacular wall, I would say. But, and it's an open question for my Indian colleagues, how do architects in the contemporary India have a way of influencing how programs are made? I think now architects can also be involved by designing programs more than designing spaces, because modern world is dealing with so much complexity that you have to go a little bit, I think, further than just making malls or condos outside the big cities. It's, I think, a question we're dealing with it too in France. How do you invent new models or new programs to bring a new architectural response that will bring inclusiveness into the city? Thank you.
Just one comment, and it kind of takes further from what he just said, is that you spoke about two things. One is about inclusivity, and that being a very important part of the vernacular. And one term or one reality that we face today in the post-industrial setup that we are, a majority of us are still operating under, is the reality called the client. And we really cannot have true inclusivity or true just, the inclusion of the mental and the physical labor involved in the building, I feel, until the client gets also involved. So that's a very important part of the process. And I think he is in a way saying the same thing, that the client is the one who makes, along with the architect, the program, who decides to a certain extent, the purpose of the building, if not the form. So just a comment that, perhaps one cannot achieve vernacular and a truly inclusive architecture without involvement of the person for whom it is being built. So if you have the labor of love building the Golden Temple, they are also building it for themselves. But in our society, we hardly see a situation where a mason is actually building a building for himself, except in the part of the country or in the societies where people are still building for themselves.
Try and put both the comment and the earlier question comment together, because you asked about the this building, and I'd like to explain that here was a case where the architect and the client worked very much together. In this building, the architect was Joseph Stein primarily, and the client was S.K. Sharma, who was actually a corporate head. He was the head of the Chairman Managing Director of the Housing and Urban Development Corporation of the Government of India, which financed this project and which actually made it possible. He negotiated the CMD of HUDCO negotiated with the government in order to make this land for this. He went and then made the program, and he then worked very closely with Stein and more or less designed the building with Stein.
Can I add something there?
Yes, please do.
He would also ask people like us to contribute in terms of working out details for the cladding. So we spent a long time working with him, and it was a labor of love, and we explained to him how the brick size could be this or that, and we went through a whole process of trying out different sizes of different
special bricks, didn't you?
And we got, so then finally the brick was made, and the whole bonding process was really using Kama Design Studios consciousness. Without any money, it was just S.K. Sharma who really was able to absorb all the ideas, and he was not scared of asking you for, asking you for inputs, and and there was absolutely no problem. So it was not just one person, one architect designing, but there were many, there were a number of let's say, different minds working together, and the capacity of the leader or the visualizer of the project, the architect is not necessarily the visualizer of the project. And so the visualizer of the project really actually can garner so many minds to work together and in a kind of informal way. And I think that if that can be done, I am sorry I didn't attend the earlier half of your lecture. In fact, I've only come for the question answer sessions, which is why I'm not talking about it at all. But this was one way in which I think a number of minds could be brought together to be conscious of the fact that a building is not just the product of one architect's mind. I think that's a very important lesson to learn.
I would say that is in the vernacular spirit.
It is in the vernacular spirit. But although when you look at this building, it is in the classical spirit, you say.
Really, I used to think that.
It's not.
Because, I have had, in the last 2 years, I've had to work in this building. Okay? So I come regularly to work. And sometimes I come by metro, sometimes I come by car and park inside. And I walk across. If I come by metro, I walk from that corner, get off the rickshaw, walk across the corner to the art commission where I have to work. I come in, twice a week or once a week or something like that. And I observe the life of the building. And I found this to be the only building which has a public space. Because in our country, we have very few public spaces available. And this is a designed public space.
Wonderful.
Not only that, the people who, for instance, planned, Amit Ghoshal was telling me that he was working on how the trees and all these plants are going to be planted in these courtyards. And he says, we never imagined that these palms are going to go right up to the top, so tall. So something has happened, and I think you're very good that you described this process of how S.K. Sharma involved the architectural community.
Absolutely.
Because he did that. And it was not only in this building. HUDCO became a kind of architectural center, hub, that's what it was for those years that he was there, until he was ruined by Anil Lal is here.
No.
Who destroyed this wonderful kind of creation,
Yes.
which had happened purely by a vernacular process, and so there we are. But it's So you put a very good question, and both of you actually contributed to make this into a.
I think very typical of architects, we're moving away from the point that he was trying to make and trying to grab the limelight as always. Now, my point, I just want to say something which connects your question about the line or the act of making a drawing and this whole thing about the vernacular of constructing something. So I'd like to talk about this instance quoted in a book called The Appearance of the Form by John Bracken, where a researcher goes to the Steinway factory where they made the Steinway piano, the grand piano, and he followed the entire process of how a piano is constructed. In the end, he asked to see the drawings of how this piano, what is the blueprint? And to his surprise, the researcher was told there is no such thing. The closest they ever came to making a drawing was the measuring stick by which you place the strings, the wires which you hit and you get the notes. So he was very surprised to find that there was no drawing, and they made these world famous pianos one after the other. And the whole thing worked because they were essentially all migrant Italian craftspeople who worked as a community. Each one knew what the other one did. They did not require any drawings, and they worked together to make the piano. And this is how buildings in the past were made. They were not always made because of slaves or serfs. The other important thing about the line, by the same Professor Bracken, was that in the American suburbia, you're not supposed to have a fence. The building is in the middle and there's a plot, but there's not supposed to be a demarcation. However, he noticed that there is always an invisible line, which everybody knows, even though you can't see it. And even animals can see it, in the sense that there was an instance of a chicken on the other side of the line and a dog on this side of the line. The dog would never cross the line, and the chicken would also never cross the line. So it's about territories. The line is about actually making territories and taking control over them. So these are the two instances, and of course the person who can be credited for giving shape to the way we modern architects work is Palladio, because he invented the building which could be planted anywhere in the plot. Everything else in the past was always made with sort of community understanding of who's making what and how you do not mess up somebody else's building by doing strange things. So there are many things about this which would help what you're saying. I'm trying to substantiate it with examples.
Thank you very much. I mean, I would love to read this book and take the reference from you. Thank you very much. Yes, please.
There's always an example where the client, the architect, and the builder are working together, and we found that in villages of Konkan, where the potter and the carpenter work together with the client, and all this vocabulary of what kind of house you would have, how many arm lengths would the room be, how many rooms with how many courtyards, how many verandas facing which direction, etc. would emerge. And there was no drawing made at all. So this potter carpenter team understood. So the imagination that you're referring to, the process, vernacular process, and they would execute the whole thing, and to the satisfaction of these people. In the urban milieu, what I have experienced is whenever the client, yourself as the architect, and the labor or the contractor are working together, they are all on one side of the table, and there is no sort of contract document which the council has prepared, which actually is meant to pass the buck on, that you start the blame game. If you don't have that, because then there is a lot of transparency, that you have the imagination and you have transparency of working together. If there are modifications, changes, there is accountability, there is cost referring back to, all these processes have become quite transparent. And the product is generally much nicer, and it pleases everybody. So, however, I think the point that you were making, I think the divide that appeared in its talk, the mental and the manual, I don't think it is quite like that. I think in both the processes there is mental and labor. There is labor which also has mental approaches and procedures. It may not be articulated in the same way as the people in urban milieu would articulate. There are differences, but the processes do exist, and they are quite well founded in those localities. So what one is referring to is when you're designing as a trained architect from a university or a college, then are you thinking of these processes, the labor-oriented or the vernacular processes, are they there in your imagination? I think that is the question that you are asking. And I think that's a very good question to which the students need to address.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. Yeah, you wanted to ask a question.
I wanted to, I think because there's a lot of architects here, so I'm feeling like the responses are...
Please pass the mic.
There's a lot of architects here, and the responses are coming from within a framework. And my feeling is that what you're saying is more radical, and the responses are perhaps coming from a context and working within that. I think what you're talking about is also about power, and I was going to raise the question of caste, which you brought up. And I mean, to talk about this Habitat Centre as inclusive seems to me to be ridiculous, actually. How is this space inclusive at all? There's lots of people, the auto driver who drops you here is not welcome in this space. It's not created there's lots more I wanted to say, but what I wanted to, like, taking your separation of vernacular and mainstream, what I wanted to say is that maybe within the vernacular as well there is a power relationship, and there is a mainstream within the vernacular. So rather than, I know people are saying that, I mean, I think there's an attempt here in a lot of the responses to talk about, you know, how we bring the vernacular into the mainstream, but that can become a form of appropriation actually, rather than, I think that's something you touched upon as well. But what I want to talk about, what I'm trying to bring up is the idea that even within that vernacular, there are those power hierarchies and a mainstream and relationships of power. So it's not about caste in terms of mainstream vernacular, but there's caste within that vernacular as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And if I had more time, I would say more about spaces and vernacular and the politics within the vernacular of how communities and skills work. But I think that's a point well taken, that yes, for vernacular to be free of these power structures as much as is possible, as the examples that we got from here, from Professor Digley and Snehanshu. I think more research needs to be done to look for similar structures where there is relative freedom from those power structures and explore what potentials they have for working them further in enriching those processes. Yeah, thank you very much for this input.
But I must say that you can take these issues in both directions. For a long time, between a close friend of mine when we were in college and myself, we discovered that E.M. Foster's story about his own background, cultural background, you know, the one what's for Howard's End, that's the story of the two sisters, which really describes English life, you know, his own life. The dedication in the beginning of the book is only connect, these two words. And another English friend of mine with whom I would point this out, it's only connect, it's wonderful. You know, Charles Eames used to say that the entire design lies in the connections. He's a great designer of the 20th century. And then my English friend gave me another book, which was Nabokov's. I think it was Lolita, but it was Lolita was another one. And in that, the dedication, quite clearly directed at E.M. Foster, because this was written 50 years later also, was only distinguish. Wow. It's quite clearly reference to Foster's dedication. Only connect and only distinguish. We have to do both. So as architects, if I may speak on behalf of this dying breed, that we are good at composition, whereas I take it that you are also a university professor or whatever, you're very good at distinguishing. But we've got to have both. I would imagine. You know, it's a very simple thing. It's called Leela. The play of life is Leela, isn't it? It's the dance. So perhaps are there architects who would like to distinguish? There are, aren't there? We do that too when we make a program at the beginning of work. We have a lot of that to do as well. But as architects, we have to primarily be concerned with the process of making life rather than describing life. And as a discipline, architecture is one of the few disciplines which deals with both thinking and making. You would find me any other discipline which does both. Medicine doesn't, law doesn't, nothing does. Prostitution doesn't, no other discipline. Accountancy doesn't. We deal with thinking and making. Politics makes nothing. What do you mean politics? Politics only makes a lot of noise in Parliament.
Like these days.
Huh? No, always they did. Huh? Politics always did just what to do and make. No, I'm serious.
How
Tell
about
me
film
any other
directors?
discipline which does both.
Film directors.
Yes.
What do you make? Ephemera, shadows. No, look what we made.
Emotions.
Yeah, emotion, all right. There's thinking. Thinking is about emotion too. No, I'm absolutely serious. Because I've had this, I must tell you, I was running a school of architecture and, I used to take the first year. Now a mother comes to me very, very early on and says, my child was there, because the child has just come from high school, they were 12th class, and now, the child is in first year and I'm training the first year student. She comes to me and she says, look, what have you done to my child? Till a few weeks ago when he was going to school, or she, whatever it may be, we had to really cajole them into doing some work, homework, this, that and the other. And now they come back home and they don't sleep the whole night. They're making drawings and they're doing your work. What have you done to them? That's what the mother told me, and this is real. I said, we do nothing. This is what this discipline is about. Once you get into it, you become like that. You can work all night. In fact, sometimes you work 2 or 3 nights in a row. Nobody asks you to. We don't, as studio directors, we never ask anybody to do that. In fact, we generally spend our time making cheap jokes, because we don't know what architecture is about, we can't tell them much. You ask these gentlemen, these professors of architecture sitting in the front row, what they talk with the students is very jokey.
This is one studio.
So it's a peculiar kind of discipline, believe me.
Does that put the lid on it?
I think we should
Wind up. Okay. Are there any more questions?
questions?
I'm sorry, I'm known to put lids on things. I didn't mean to. Yeah. Then may I have a request to make. You see, Greha is this organization which has sort of produced this platform thanks to the India Habitat Center on their program division. And we, as Greha, I have asked my colleagues to some membership forms. Greha is a very small membership organization, and it is an organization concerned with growth of knowledge. Basically, that's our purpose, that's our objective. And if anybody would like to we welcome new members. So there are some application forms, whatever they call it, membership forms, which are in somewhere around the back. And if anybody would like to take one, please do. We welcome new members. And this is one platform which we feel we can perhaps be more, include more and more people. Inclusive, we'll try and be inclusive. Who's got the forms? Okay, their forms are there. Yeah. And if that's all that there is, then we can wind up, take some forms.
Well, from my side, thank you very much for being patient and listening to us.